All right, it's almost the end of 2025, and it's time for us to talk about best books of the year. I pulled some books off my shelf, and I got a couple on my Kindle that I want to talk about. I'm not going to rank these in any way or give them any kind of rating, but what I am going to do is just talk about why these books had the most impact on me this year as a reader, I guess. So, first book is a book that I just couldn't put down. It's kind of a thriller, but it's not like a Tom Clancy airport thriller, but it's definitely a page turner, and it's a book that I just could not read fast enough. I found myself staying up late at night and reading it anytime I could get a chance to finish it up, and it's this, Doggerland by Ben Smith. Like I said, this is probably the most exciting book I've read all year and one of the most mysterious books. This is a kind of dystopian story about a boy and a man who are tending to a wind farm somewhere, I believe it's in northern England, and it's after a great amount of climate change that has just transformed the landscape around them. Everything is flooded except these sort of platforms with wind turbines on them. That does not sound very exciting, but it is an exciting story because what it's really all about is this young man trying to discover the truth and trying to reconnect with his father. And I just found it to be really thrilling and just an absolute page turner. I really, really enjoyed it. It's one of my top reads of the year. All right, now the second book I have on my Kindle, and I just recently did a video on it. This is probably the best like grit lit book that I read this year. It's Whatever Kills the Pain by C.W. Blackwell. And like I said, this is grit lit. In case you don't know what grit lit is, it's sometimes also referred to as country noir or Appalachian noir or rural noir. This is a collection of short stories, basically of people kind of down and out, living on the margins of society, trying to get by. But there's a bit of a criminal element to it, and it was recommended to me as a crime read, but I wouldn't necessarily think of it as a crime book, although there are plenty of criminal activity in it. It's very heartwarming. It's very touching. It's kind of funny in some places too. It's kind of uplifting, but there's always kind of an underpinning of darkness to it. And I found it to really kind of ring true with the state of America and the state of life kind of in general all around the world. They're very American stories, but also very universal stories. Okay, now this next book to me was very, very surprising. It was not what I had expected at all. And to me, it was very different than how it was reviewed. It's a book filled with some flashes of hope and brilliance. It takes place in a very strange world, but also a very familiar world. And it's this, I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. Definitely one of my top reads of the year. It's been out for a couple of years. A lot of people have talked about it in BookTube, but I think it's a book that gets misrepresented a lot, but not on purpose. And I don't think anyone means ill by it, but I think that's because it's a book that's really hard to tag and it's really hard to pin down. It does a lot of different things, and it does all of these things very effectively. It's definitely a story of feminism. It's definitely a story of what can and may very well likely go wrong in the world. It's definitely a post-apocalyptic story, and it's kind of also the story of the end of humankind, or possibly the end of humankind. In case you don't know, the narrative centers around a group of women who are being kept in a cage underground by soldiers. And the main character in the story is the youngest woman who was brought into captivity when she was very young, and that's kind of where the title comes from. She kind of doesn't really know the outside world. She doesn't know a world before being kept in captivity. Very early in the book, something happens. The soldiers that are keeping them in there and kind of tending to them in this cage, that's a horrible phrase to say. I'm very sorry to have said that, but it happens in the book. The soldiers all run out. Something happens. They run out from their bunker and accidentally leave the door open, and the women are able to go out, and they discover an empty world, basically. It's incredibly well written. It's incredibly touching. It's a very moving story. It's a very powerful story. And what makes it just so great and really stick with you is that there are just so many different ways to to think about the story and to interpret the story. All right, now speaking of interpretation, this next book was probably the most politically charged book that I read this year, and also possibly one of the most socially relevant books that I read this year, and a very moving and an incredible book. It is Human Acts by Han Kang. This is a book that gets talked about a lot. Han Kang is definitely a very hot author and very well deserving of it all. This book really blew me away. Again, not what I had expected, not what I had kind of been led to believe. It centers around the Gwangjo uprising in South Korea, which called for the toppling or the regime change in South Korea that kind of gave birth to its current, more democratic state. However, it's not a political drama at all. The story centers around some of the deaths that occur in the uprising. In case you don't know, it's a very bloody uprising. The South Korean army were gunning down protesters in the street. And on top of that, there was also a lot of information suppression, and sort of the years after, it sort of echoed through and it really impacted a lot of people's lives. It's a really interesting book because Han Kang, this is the second book I've read of hers in which she's done this. She utilizes various different points of view to retell the same, or to recount the same event, but in very different ways and with very different impacts. And I just found it to be incredibly moving. It's a very short book, and it's a really highly recommended book. Definitely one of the best. I said I wasn't going to recommend books, but I would recommend this one. The next book I pulled off my shelf is definitely one of the most violent books that I read this year, and a very emotionally bleak book. It's a story of a young reporter fresh on the job who gets assigned to investigate a series of murders involving young women, which turn out to be part of a serial murderer. It's 1974 by David Peace, and this is the first book in his Red Riding Quartet. I read the second book, which I did not really enjoy as much, but I found this book to just be absolutely impossible to put down, despite the fact that it's really emotionally bleak. I mean, if you're not ready for a dark book, don't read this. It's an incredibly dark book, and it's dark not so much because of the subject matter, which is very dark and is graphically written about. It's very explicit, but the real darkness in the book is how the main character, who's a reporter, becomes unraveled while he's piecing together this case, and he comes across a lot of information that he just can't handle, and that just really just like tears his mind and his soul apart. And he kind of unravels this very large conspiracy in the town and possibly throughout England that involves the church, police, and local governments who are all complicit in these murders and in these crimes. Really disturbing book. All right, the next book I read was also really powerful and disturbing, but in a different way. It's a book that is probably one of the most intimate books that I read this year. And also, I found the book that I kind of personally identified with the most this year. It's From Blue to Black by Joel Lane. I did a video on this earlier in one of my great books that no one talks about. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but it's about a relationship between a bass player and a guitar player, singer-songwriter, who are in a post-punk band. It's set in the early 90s in Northern England, and the band is kind of on the verge of becoming quite big and quite popular, but what holds them down is the depression and the emotional trauma that the lead singer is trying to work through. And it's a very interesting book. It's very intimate, but it's also very dark and very bleak. As the main character watches his lover kind of come uncracked and basically throw away everything that they've worked to have. So really, really powerful book. I found it to be really emotionally difficult, but also very satisfying at the same time. The next book I pulled off the shelf was definitely the biggest surprise for me this year. It's a book I kind of bought on impulse while I was on vacation in Bangkok. I was really drawn to the cover, not going to lie. I bought it mainly because I really like the cover. I like the title. And of course, I like the blurb on the back. It's a story of Malaysian communist rebels fighting for political voice in their country. But the stories are not political. They're not about the war. It's more about the bonds and the relationships and what they must do to survive in the jungle. It's this book. It's Delicious Hunger by Hai Fan and translated by Jeremy Tiang. And it's a fantastic book. It's a collection of short stories. And like I said, it's not about the politics. It's not about fighting the war or the battles or the skirmishes. It's about what they have to do to survive in the jungle. They're out in the jungle for a very long period of time. So there's some really fascinating stories about what they do to survive. And it's also about the bonds and the relationships and also what has spurred them on to join this movement and to become directly involved in the literal fight to have a political voice and to try to change their country. And there's a kind of irony in it because while they're fighting to change the country, they actually end up kind of creating a small version of the society that they want to have, with the kind of comradeship and the kind of kinship and the relationships that they develop together. It's also a really fascinating story because the author, Hai Fan, did join this movement. He's still very politically active, although now he lives in Singapore. So a lot of the stuff that it's in the book is actually very true. So I found it to also be really fascinating and very realistic. The next book I pulled off my shelf is probably one of my oldest loves, and it really renewed my love and interest for the contemporary short story. It's Last Night by James Salter. This is a really tiny, thin collection, but don't let that turn you off. There's a lot going on in this book. These stories are really, really powerful. James Salter, in case you don't know, is probably one of the most underrated and unknown American writers. He passed away about 10 years ago, but he's got a whole body of incredible work. And I think his short stories are probably some of the best short stories you can find out there. These are very literary short stories, and I find them fantastic and touching and powerful. And I find that they really stick with me because they really explore slices of their character's life, not in an overly realistic and dry way that you often find with realism. But what he's really great at is depicting a sort of decisive moment, if you're familiar with that in photography, or for modernists, it would be sort of the epiphany, although it's not often an epiphany, but it's a decisive moment in the characters' lives when something changes suddenly. Sometimes they're aware of that and sometimes they're not, but they've done something, or there's a consequence, or there's some kind of choice, and suddenly their life is going to take some kind of shift. And of course, those moments often involve something in a relationship or some kind of life-changing moment. And I just find them to just be fantastic. I love the way he writes. He writes with an incredible economy. There's not a wasted word in any of these stories. They're just absolutely wonderful. So if you're a fan of like Raymond Carver or any kind of like contemporary short story writer, definitely need to check out James Salter, and definitely need to check out Last Night. This next book is also a collection of short stories, but I found it to be very different from James Salter, and I found it to be probably the most creative book that I've read this year. It was really absolutely just a delightful collection to read. Very surprising. Again, not what I thought it would be at all. Highly, highly original. It's Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's the way I'm going to say it, Ted Chiang. This collection is famous because it contains the story that was turned into the movie Arrival, which is a fantastic movie, and I love it. The story that it comes from is obviously going to be very different, somehow actually even more moving than the movie. I found the movie to actually be very moving. I don't know if you did or not. But the stories in here are just absolutely amazing. Definitely science fiction, but not hard science fiction. I always thought it would be more science fiction-like because the movie Arrival, is definitely presented as a science fiction film, although there's a lot more going on under the hood there, and it's really just about memory, and it's about love and relationships. These stories I found, like I said, just to be absolutely delightful. They were wonderful to read, highly, highly creative. It reminded me of just like a fantastic collection of maybe like Twilight Zone episodes, or if you remember that Alfred Hitchcock had a TV series, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which were always just really cool things to see. Very innovative, very creative. I just keep saying that word, very creative, but I found it to just be one of the most surprising books of the year. I would definitely recommend it to you. Okay, I said I would stop recommending books. I need to stop doing that. This last book is the most troubling book that I read this year, and probably the best horror book that I read of the year. It's Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bazterrica, and I probably mispronounced that. Again, I am infamous for mispronouncing names. So there you go. This was also a page turner, but also a very, very dark book. It's a book that's gotten talked about a lot. I'm a little bit late to the party on it. It's a dystopian story in which in the future, there's been some sort of virus that has killed that has caused humans to kill off all of their animals and livestock. And the governments of the world somehow decide that it's okay to raise humans to eat as meat. And that is the tender flesh that is referred to in the book. Besides being a strangely compelling story of like, okay, how did we get to that point? The writing in it I found to just be incredible. I just loved the prose in it. And the characters I found to be fascinating, horrifying, and terrible all at the same time. And the main character undergoes probably one of the worst character arcs and worst character transformations you could possibly imagine, and yet you can't stop reading it. So it's just written so, so well. Those were the best books that I read this year. Again, not ranked, not in any order. I just pulled books that were really powerful to me and really had an incredible impact on me and have really shaped my reading to come in the next year. So let me know, what are some of the great books that you read this year, and why did you think that they were great? What kind of effect did they have on you? I would love to get some more ideas and some more suggestions. In case you don't know, my name is Carl, and this has been Please Read Your Book.